Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Bracha Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And this is First Maccabees, the fourth chapter. About a couple of months ago, I started going into the book of Maccabees from the first chapter because there's a lot of history and important information that takes place, during the time, as they call the intertestamental period, right? The period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And a lot of that information is contained in the book of, Maccabees, that records the time where the Greeks were ruling. Because when you deal with the time of the Old Testament, you really have books that pertain, historically up until I believe around the reign of the Persians or the Achaemenid Empire, but then after that, when you jump to the book of Matthew or book of John or one of, the Gospels and so on and so forth in the New Testament, you start dealing with the the reign of the Romans. But we know that historically, um, in between the Persians and the Romans, you have the Greeks, okay, and that history is contained, and how they affected, Israel and so on and so forth is contained within the book of Maccabees. It's prophesied in the book of Daniel, but it's also contained in the book of Maccabees. All right, so it's important to know that history because a lot goes on during that time, which when you understand, it'll better explain certain events that take place, or at least the setting of the New Testament, and why you have the Apostle Paul being sent to quote unquote Gentiles, and all of that. It becomes clearer when you understand the history prior to that. Okay, so we're gonna go into the fourth chapter, continuing. I already went through the first three chapters, and so Lord willing, this will be an edifying lesson. But also within this fourth chapter, it would deal with the rededication of the temple, okay, which had been defiled by the heathens under the authority and consent of or orders, I should say, of Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, okay, because he was the king at this time. So this is the book of First Maccabees chapter 4 verse 1, and continuing from the third chapter, it says, then took Georgius 5,000 footmen and 1,000 of the best horsemen, and removed out of the camp by night, to the end he might rush in upon the camp of the Jews and smite them suddenly. And the men of the fortress were his guides. It says, yeah, because you had, at this point you had the Judas Maccabees, all right, leading, the revolt against the Greek authorities. Now I believe Antiochus had basically left his he left Lysias in charge, and under Lysias's orders, you had Georgius and a few other men that he put in charge of putting down the revolt and dealing with the Jews. So that's why you have this conflict going on here. Um, verse 3 says, now when Judas heard thereof, he himself removed, and the valiant men with him, that he might smite the king's army, which was at Emmaus. It says, or Emmaus, however you say that, while as yet the fortresses or the forces were dispersed from the camp. Now, as you read, when you read through certain different precepts, and they start mentioning certain locations, it's always good. Let's see, let's look this up here. To try and at least get some looking up maps, some imagery. Oh boy. Of a geographical location of this in your mind. Now, a lot of these different areas, they don't have exact pinpoint locations for. These are, circa, or like estimates of, it would likely be around this area or likely be around this area. But nevertheless, it can help you form some picture. I mean, at this point, you should already have, when you're dealing with names of different locations in Israel, you should already have image of the land in your head, at least. If somebody mentions Edom, you should have some or Idumea, some understanding of where is that located in respect to this land right here, the land of what used to be called Canaan. When they mention the Dead Sea or the Jordan River or the Sea of Galilee, or the east side of Jordan, where are these things? You should be able to have at least some basic recognition or recollection of where these places are located. So it's always good to look up the geographical locations so you can get an understanding as you're reading of where are these events taking place and what's happening. All right, it's also very important. So looking at a few of these images here, they seem to place it, somewhat a little northwest of Jerusalem. Okay, you can see the Dead Sea is on the right, and you can see they place it somewhere here. But also, if you look at here, all right, here they also place it somewhere a little northwest of Jerusalem. Okay, and it would make sense because the capital of the Seleucid Empire was Antioch, right? So that was one of the top main cities, which is north. All right, it's in Syria. So if the armies are coming to Jerusalem or coming around this region, it's very it makes sense that they will be coming from the north on down. And as you can see, this is actually a good geographical image because it shows you the different types of terrain. Like around this area where Jerusalem is a mountainous range. Okay, and then you have here which is more like plains. All right, and you have going up. So you'll notice that sometimes when you read the scriptures, it'll say like, oh, I was at, I don't know, I was at Tyre, or I was at Damascus, and I went up to Jerusalem. Now, when you look on the map this way, you may think, well, shouldn't up be going up north and down going down south, but up meaning geographically, because in order to get to Jerusalem, you have to actually go up. Altitude scale wise, it's higher. And likewise, then they'll say, I went down, to Damascus, or went down from Jerusalem. All right, it's because Jerusalem is is on the mountainous range. Okay, so going back to the reading or to the chapter, where are we? All right, so verse 4 says, while as yet the forces were dispersed from the camp, in the mean season came Georgius by night into the camp of Judas, and when he found no man there, right, because Judas and them had already left that camp, um, when he found no man there, he sought them in the mountains, for he said, these fellows flee from us. So Georgius thought that Judas and them were they were afraid and they were running. So basically, he was saying, well, if they're not in their camp, then they must have got wind and they probably ran away. Let's go get them. So it says, but as soon as it was day, Judas showed himself in the plain with 3,000 men, who nevertheless had neither armor nor swords to their minds. And they saw the camp of the heathen, that it was strong and well harnessed and compassed round about with horsemen, and these were expert of war. And as you read this, you can learn a lot from what were the tactics that Judas was using, because being the leader, right prior to them entering a battle, he would always exhort, his men with by calling, back to remembrance the things that the Most High did in the past, and he would always put them in remembrance that it's not about them or the weapons they have or their numbers. It's about the Most High giving the victory to whom He will. And when you put it like that, then they understand that, you know what? Why am I even worried? As though it's up to me, as though it was up to whether I had enough, people in this army or whether they have more people than me. The victory of the battle is not determined that way. It's determined by Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. So that's why he would always, do that, as we're about to read. So it says here, verse 8, then said Judas to the men that were with him, fear ye not their multitude, neither be ye afraid of their assault. Remember how our fathers were delivered in the Red Sea when Pharaoh pursued them with an army. See, so he reminds them, look, and when you think about it, that was really more of a, it looks more like an impossible situation where on one side you have mountains on one side, you have the troops of Pharaoh behind you, and then in front of you is a whole giant body of water. That then what? And the Lord parted that in half so that they could walk on dry land across. So putting them in the remembrance of the Lord doing something like that, then calms you down to, well, if the Lord can do that, then he can most definitely deliver these people into our hands. Right? So it says, verse 10, now therefore let us cry unto heaven, if peradventure the Lord will have mercy upon us, and remember the covenant of our fathers, and destroy this host before our face this day, so that all the heathen may know that there is one who delivereth and saveth Israel. Then the strangers lifted up their eyes and saw them coming over against them. Wherefore they went out of the camp to battle, but they that were with Judas sounded their trumpets. So they joined battle, and the heathen, being discomfited, fled into the plain. Yeah, because Judas did the right thing. He exhorted them to stand firm, and then they called upon the Lord, acknowledging that it's the Lord who's really fighting the battle for them or for us. Right? So it says here, verse 15, howbeit all the hindermost of them that were slain with the sword, for they pursued them onto Gazara and onto the plains of Idumea and Azotus and Jamnia, so that there were slain of them upon a 3,000 men. And we know Idumea is south. Okay, it's south, more south down. Okay, but it doesn't say that necessarily they went all the way there, but they went towards that direction. I mean, they could have gone all the way there. They were fleeing, right? Because they were getting cooked. Verse 16, it says, this done, Judas returned again with his host from pursuing them, and said to the people, be not greedy of the spoil, inasmuch as there is a battle before us. So remember, after they had discomfited and caused Georgius's army to flee, they came back to the camp of that army, and they were about to get the spoils and the goods, but he let them know, look, we still got, the fight is not finished yet, so don't lose focus just yet. It says, verse 18, and Georgius and his hosts are here by us in the mountain, but stand ye now against our enemies and overcome them, and after this ye may boldly take the spoils. And Judas, as Judas was yet speaking these words, there appeared a part of them looking out of the mountain, who, when they perceived that the Jews had put their host to flight, and were burning the tents, for the smoke that was seen declared what was done. So once the rest of the army saw they saw Judas and them burning their tents, right, the tents of the army, they said, oh shoot, I mean, that means that, because when you go to war with another group, and you now you're at the point where you're burning their camp and all that, that means you already defeated them. So that's the idea that Georgius's army got, and they got shook because of that. So it says, verse 21, when therefore they perceived these things, they were sore afraid, and seeing also the host of Judas in the plain ready to fight, they fled every one into the land of strangers. So they whatever land, the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Moabite, whatever land was near, they were out. Now, keeping in mind that prior to them coming to this battle, of course, rumors had gone out that this guy Judas, he's because the Lord was with him, so they started getting a rep, and that's why it became so problematic that it went all the way up to the rulers of the Seleucid Empire, who then sent these armies to come and basically put a stop to it. So that rumors were already going around. So you already know that in some of the soldiers there, in some of their minds, they're thinking, yo, I mean, I heard this guy's a monster, man. I mean, he was just, shit. These guys are. So now when they come to war, they shake it off, they come to war, and then they see something like this happen. They're not wasting no time. Ain't no bravery coming out of nowhere. They're out. Verse 23, it says, Then Judas returned to spoil the tents, where they got much gold and silver and blue silk and purple of the sea and great riches. After this, they went home and sung a song of thanksgiving and praised the Lord in heaven because it is good, because his mercy endureth forever. Thus Israel had a great deliverance that day. Now all the strangers that had escaped came and told Lysias what had happened, who, when he heard thereof, was confounded and discouraged, because neither such things as he would were done unto Israel, because it was under his orders, nor such things as the king commanded him were come to pass. Because when the king left and commanded him, he said, "Look, I'm gonna put you in charge. Take care of these, these people that are revolting." You know, and that wasn't happening. It wasn't going according to plan for Lysias. The next year, therefore, following, Lysias gathered together 60, which is 60,000 choice men of foot. So 60,000 choice men, not just regular men, good top-notch men, and 5,000 horsemen, that he might subdue them. So they came into Idumea and pitched their tents at Bethsura, and Judas met them with 10,000 men. So now let's look that up. Let me see. Battles of Judas Maccabees. Sometimes they pull all the different locations that you can see. Let's see. All right. And then let's also pull up Bethsura. Let's do Bible. All right, let's see. Where do they place this? Okay. All right. Oh, not Bethsaida. Bethsura. You see. All right, so it looks like it might be the same location as what they call Beth Zor. Let's see if I type in here Bethsura. Yep. So another name for it is Beth Zor, which they also call Beth Sura. So it's the same location. So at least they place it somewhere around here, which is, a little south of Jerusalem, and a little somewhat north of Idumea. So as it says, when Lysias' army came and pitched in Idumea, so they would be facing, coming up towards north. All right. So continuing, it says here, and pitched their tents at Bethsura, and Judas met them with 10,000 men. Verse 30, it says, and when he saw that mighty army, he prayed and said, so as great of a warrior as Judas was, what was really the secret to his success? Prayer, faith. He kept relying on the Most High, on Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai. That's how all great men, achieved that greatness, because they relied on the true power, Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai. Okay? And that's what he always did. So it says, and when he saw that mighty army, he prayed and said, blessed art thou. Now, notice how he sent these prayers. Whenever he prayed, it wasn't just, oh Lord, please, we need your help us. But he would call into the Lord's remembrance. He would bring it back to the Lord's mind, the things the Lord did. If you notice, you would have, men of old who would send prayers up to the Lord, and they would say that, oh Lord, you delivered us in the past, just like you did for this person or for that person, do it for us as well. You're merciful, just like you were merciful to such and such, and you remind the Lord of these things. Because when you ask somebody for help, it's one thing to just ask them right away, but when you sometimes, like, there's a tactic that certain people use, right? And I'm not saying that this he was using any tactics on the Lord. The Lord does what he wants. But there's a certain tactic that certain people use, which is to appeal when you ask somebody for help, don't don't do it in a way where you appeal to their necessarily their mercy, but rather appeal to their nature. Okay? Meaning what appeal to something that's beneficial for them. So when you put a decision before somebody, you come to them, you want them to do one thing, but you can see that they're kind of, they're kind of conflicted. They kind of want to also do the other thing, but you really want them to do that other one thing that you want them to do. So you don't pressure them. You just tell them, I just need your help, doing this and so on and so forth, but just think about it. I know that you're a good person. I know you're a very kind person, and I know you'll do the right thing. That's really all you got to say. And those words alone is gonna you're appealing now to this person's nature. And humans have a tendency to want to preserve their image in people's minds. So if this person sees you a certain kind of way, and you also see yourself as that kind of way, you kind of always want to preserve that. Okay. So when they make that statement, like, I know you're a kind person and I know you'll do the right thing, you always do the right thing, then when you think of doing something opposite, you feel as though it's conflicting with your nature of being a quote unquote kind person, or you're not doing the right thing. Which, I mean, it could be, it could not be, but that's just human nature. The point that I'm making here is Judas Maccabees. What he was doing was he was reminding the Lord, saying, "Oh Lord, but just as you did for such and such, or you did for such and such, remember us also." So it says here, O Savior of Israel, who didst quell the violence of the mighty man by the hand of thy servant David, which is this guy, what's his name? Goliath, and gave us the host, and it goes to show you that Judas was learned. I mean, he was a priest, he was a Levite, but they were learned in the law and in the history. Okay, he wasn't just somebody that just ran, because people will, when they think of the Maccabees and they think of Judas Maccabees, they just think of some warrior, because it said, he was valiant and all that. They just think, oh, he was just a warrior. He just got on the battlefield just with a sword and shield, and that's it. That's all he knew how to do, cut people up. No. Okay. But yeah, warriors, warriors are brilliant, because war is not something that it's like, oh, you just anybody just gets up and they just go to war. No, when you're on the battlefield, you need to be very, very number one, you need to have very keen instincts, but also make split second decisions and be wise. Because if you're an idiot and you're on the battlefield, it doesn't matter how sharp of a warrior you are, you're not going to survive. Okay, so as it says here, who didst quell the violence of the mighty man by the hand of thy servant David, and gavest the host of strangers into the hands of Jonathan the son of Saul, and his armor bearer. Shut up this army in the hand of thy people Israel, and let them be confounded in their power and horsemen. Make them be of no courage, and cause the boldness of their strength to fall away, and let them quake at their destruction. Cast them down with the sword of them that love thee, and let all those that know thy name praise thee with thanksgiving. So they joined battle, and there were slain of the host of Lysias about 5,000 men. Even before them were they slain. Now when Lysias saw his army put to flight, and the manliness of Judas's soldiers, and how they were ready to either live or die valiantly, he went into Antiochia, or Antiochia, or however that name is pronounced. Um, so it says, yeah, Antiochia. It says, and gathered together a company of strangers, and having made his army greater than it was, he purposed to come again into Judea. This guy, he just wasn't giving up. Well, he couldn't, because his ass would have been on the line when Antiochus came back and found out that this issue that he had left in Lysias's charge was still ongoing. So it says, Verse 36, then said Judas and his brethren, behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary. Now, keep in mind that these things are not occurring over a span of days. You know, they come to war, then they beat him, then the next day they flee, then the next day, Lysias gathers an army greater than the next, and now he's on his way in the following week. Okay, so it says, then said Judas and his brethren, behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary. Yeah, remember, because Judas and his brethren, they were at Modian. And then that's where Mattathias slew that wicked Israelite and that the officer that came to try and get them to sacrifice pork. And then they fled into the wilderness, all right, the mountains and all of that. So they did hear about how the temple was rent and destroyed, and how the heathens built a fortress there to basically take out anybody that tried to come and worship or even come near the sanctuary. So now at this point they said, all right, let's go back and let's go and clean that the sanctuary up. Verse 37, it says, upon this all the host assembled themselves together and went up into Mount Sion. And when they saw the sanctuary desolate, and the altar profaned, and the gates burned up, and the shrubs growing in the courts as in a forest, or in one of the mountains, yea, and the priest's chambers pulled down, because this was years after. When Antiochus first came there and then pulled down the temple and destroyed, did all that, this was years after that they went back to go and rededicate it. So by the time they got there, I mean, it must have been a sight to behold. The temple that was once a glorious, beautiful place, you come there, the gates are burned. You got vegetation, not just trees and all that growing in the courts. The altars, everything just looks dead and profane and defiled. It says they rent their clothes and made great lamentation and cast ashes upon their heads, which is a sign of mourning. And fell down flat to the ground upon their faces, and blew an alarm with the trumpets, and cried toward heaven. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the fortress until he had cleansed the sanctuary. Yeah, remember, because Antiochus had him set up, that fortress, and then they filled it up. They stored up victuals and all that, and then they stored set up like a garrison there. So it says, verse 42, so he chose priests of blameless conversation. Now, blameless conversation doesn't mean this guy never said a curse word in his life. He never spoke. Conversation. I'm sure if you look into the Greek, it should be the Greek word. I think it's anastrifo or so, which is a manner of life or a manner of conduct. So these men lived, a just lives, so to speak. They had a good reputation. It says, such as had pleasure in the law, who cleansed the sanctuary and bare out the defiled stones into an unclean place. Because remember that when you go back into the law, it was the Levites. You had the different families of the Levites who were appointed different operations or services when it came to the temple or the tabernacle. I believe you had the Kohorites. Damn, I forget the names of the different families, but you had, I think, about three or four different families of the Levites. Some were in charge of the vessels, carrying the vessels. Some were in charge, I believe, the sons of Aaron. They were in charge of the services in general. And then you had some that were in charge of carrying the altar, and then some were in charge of the coverings, okay, the veil and all of those things. So you had different Levites in charge of different things, but it wasn't a job that just regular Israelites would go and do. So it says, verse 43, who cleansed the sanctuary and bare out the defiled stones into an unclean place. And when as they consulted what to do with the altar of burnt offerings, which was profaned, they thought it best to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the heathen had defiled it, wherefore they pulled it down. So there was an altar where you would offer burnt offerings, but the heathens defiled that altar. So instead of just leaving it there, they decided, since it's been defiled, let's take it down. It says, and laid up the stones. There we go. Khan, the water, bro. This is Yahweh's warrior, Numbers 26 and 58. These are the families of the Levites, the family of the Libnites, the family of the Hebronites, the family of the Malites, the family of the Mushites, the family of the Korathites, and Kohath begat Amram. Yeah, Khan. So I believe that the what did I say? The Korathites were one of those in there who was given a lot in the services, and a few others. But going on, it says, where we at? Oh yeah, verse 46. And they laid up the stones in the mountain of the temple in a convenient place, until there should come a prophet to shew what should be done with them. Then they took whole stones according to the law, and built a new altar according to the former. And I believe in the law it tells you that when you build an altar, it must be with stones that haven't been hewn, so they haven't been hit with like the end of a weapon, a hammer or whatever, right? So that's why they took whole stones and built a new altar according to the former, and made up the sanctuary and the things that were within the temple, and hollowed the courts. They made also new holy vessels, and into the temple they brought the candlestick, and the altar of burnt offerings, and of incense, and the table. And upon the altar they burned incense, and the lamps that were, because you had two altars. You had one which was for burnt incense, and there was one for burnt offerings. And I believe the one that was for incense was within the holy place, and at least back the way it was described in the Old Testament. And then there was one that was outside, but within the boundaries of the tabernacle, where they would offer the burnt offerings. So that you had two altars, one specifically for incense, and one for the sacrifices. So it says, and upon the altar they burned incense, and the lamps that were upon the candlestick they lighted, that they might give light in the temple. Verse 51, furthermore, they set the loaves upon the table, which is bread, and spread out the veils, and finished all the works which they had begun to make. Now on the 25th day, the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called the month Caslu, in the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning, and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made. Yeah, because you had the morning oblation and you had the evening oblation, where you sacrificed in the morning and you sacrificed in the evening. Verse 54, look at what time and what day the heathen had profaned it, even in that it was dedicated with songs and citherns and harps and cymbals. And I believe that when you read in First Maccabees, the first chapter, it was also in the month Caslu, I think the 15th day or so, that they were profaning and defiling the temple and so on and so forth. Verse 55, then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising the God of heaven, who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, and offered burnt offering. And this is where you get your history of Hanukkah, or the Feast of Dedication. All right, it's here. First Maccabees, the 4th chapter. It says, and offered burnt offerings with gladness, and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. And they decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold, and with shields, and the gates and the chambers they renewed, and hanged doors upon them. And like I said, this didn't happen overnight. It took a period of time, because this is a lot of work. Thus was there a very great gladness among the people, for that the reproach of the heathen was put away. Moreover, Judas and his brethren, with the whole congregation of Israel, ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be what? Should be kept in their season from year to year, by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month Caslu, with mirth and gladness. So there goes your feast of dedication, which Yahushua kept. So for those that try to disannul the Apocrypha or even the book of Maccabees, then you need to explain where is the history of the feast of dedication, because this was a feast that was ordained as a result of this action, of this situation, of this event that took place. Just like the feast of Purim. Purim didn't exist before Purim. It came back. It came as a result of the situation with Esther and Mordecai and Xerxes and all of that, and Haman. Same thing here. So when you go into the different feast days or holy days in the law, you won't see these because these haven't occurred yet, or they hadn't occurred yet up until this time. So how would you explain what and where the history of the Feast of Dedication is? It's here in the book of Maccabees, which is in the Apocrypha. So it says, verse 60, at that time also they builded upon the Mount Sion with high walls and strong towers round about, lest the Gentiles should come and tread it down as they had done before. Yeah, and Jerusalem was known as a fortress city. So it was built to withstand sieges and attacks and all of that. And that's why the heathens were making a complaint against us when we tried to rebuild the temple and the walls during the time of the reign of the Persians. It says here, verse 61, and they set there a garrison to keep it, and fortified. And the garrison is like a troop, like a small troop of armies, to or a small army or whatnot, to keep the place, to like a station, to make sure everything is good and in order. It says, and fortified Bethsura to preserve it, that the people might have a defense against Idumea. Okay, so there you go. All right, that's First Maccabees, the 4th chapter. All right, and yeah, Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. That's where you get the history of Hanukkah. All right, otherwise known as the Feast of Dedication. And like I said, Lord willing, the Spirit permits, I'll try to keep going, in the subsequent chapters. But let's see how the Spirit moves on that. So, Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.